like a tobacco-free campus or tobacco-free parks and beaches. I'm going to share with you the reason I think this is important, and the reasons that tobacco-free campuses and tobacco-free properties, as a rule, make sense for the rest of us who don't smoke. So just before I start, how many of you smoke currently? Anybody? Wow, this is going to be the easiest talk I've ever had to do. I've got to warn you all over already. So this is the non-smoking crowd. A lot of this you're going to see is geared toward trying to explain to people who use tobacco why the rest of us don't necessarily want to be in that sphere. Right? It's not, I'm not here to belittle smokers, I'm here to belittle smoke. You understand the distinction, right? And now I have to belittle vape. I've got a whole new side job of belittling things. So I'm going to share with you my experience, some science, some reasons, some policy changes throughout the state to explain why this is important. The single most important reason that this is important is it kills almost 500,000 people every year. Those are preventable deaths. Those people would not have died except that they used tobacco. And on average, they died 15 years earlier than they would have if they had never used tobacco. It costs the U.S. economy about $10 trillion a year in medical costs and lost wages. It is a drain on our economy when we allow it to take place in a workplace in particular. As a toxic air, secondhand smoke is categorized the same as diesel exhaust. If you would not wrap your lips around the tailpipe of a bus, you should not wrap your lips around a cigarette. Surgeon General's warning in 2006 concluded that even the smallest level of secondhand smoke exposure is harmful, so it is not safe for those of us in the environment. And believe it or not, almost 10% of these deaths are among people who are only exposed to secondhand smoke. And if you divided that out, it would be the third leading cause of preventable death. These are people who did not choose to smoke. These are people who are simply being exposed in an environment over the long term, or maybe even over casual exposure to smoke. So let's talk about the deaths, because this is the thing that always fascinated me. People ask me why I don't see patients in the office anymore. It's because I can save a lot more people trying to prevent this from happening than I can talking about, stomach flu with a mom of a 9-month-old. 440,000 people a year die from this. That's an enormous number. It's by far the leading cause of preventable death. 2 out of 3 people who die early from something in the United States die because of tobacco use, and the other 1 out of 3 dies from something else on the list. Everything else combined kills 1 out of 3 people early. Tobacco takes the other 2. And some important things on this list, right? This is alcohol. Number 2 is alcohol. It's about 100,000 deaths a year. That's a combination of acute alcohol poisoning, chronic alcoholism, and alcohol-related traffic fatalities. So drunk driving, top 3. Well, if I go home today and I pull through a red light, I'm going to go right to traffic school, aren't I? To have my explanation explain what I did wrong, because we're trying to prevent deaths by motor vehicle fatalities, right? If we cite a teenager for tobacco use, do they get an educational program? Do they understand what their mistake was? Do we try to prevent them from doing that again? No, we don't pay any attention to this, or limited attention to this, anywhere near the way we pay attention to other causes of death, preventable causes of death. I just want to point out a couple other ones. Drug policy always gets a lot of scrutiny. Here's heroin and morphine, that's the little purple line. Cocaine and crack, that's the little pink line. Combined, that's about 6,000 deaths a year. We fight a war on drugs to try to prevent those 6,000 deaths a year. And some would argue that the war on drugs has actually reduced that to those low numbers. But where's this war? Why do we let this go on and we put people in jail for possession of these? This is the scourge, not those. Approximately 10% of those deaths from tobacco, as I mentioned, are caused by secondhand smoke. Only 3,400 of those are lung cancer deaths. The vast majority of deaths from secondhand smoke exposure is heart disease, primarily acute heart attacks. What do you think the chemical is that's setting off heart attacks in non-smokers? It's nicotine. Nicotine is a vasoconstrictor. It increases your blood pressure. It increases your heart rate. It steals oxygen from your blood. And all of those things lead to acute heart attacks. And I'm going to show you a study in a little bit to account for why heart attack prevention would be the main reason to keep tobacco out of public places. So again, tobacco is the most important public health problem we face in the United States, and we have to do more to prevent that. One of the ways we do that is to denormalize it. Many people will argue with us that, well, it's my right to do this, I should be allowed to do this. I'm not arguing whether you can or can't do that. I'm trying to put the same restrictions on tobacco use that we put on alcohol use forever. I'm a craft beer drinker. I don't just waltz into my office with a growler of, 64 ounces of beer. I'm not allowed to do that. We've had restrictions on all kinds of recreational drugs in the workplace. Somehow this one's gotten a free pass for way too long, and the science is catching up, and now all the people who've had a free pass feel like they're having something taken away from them. That's not the case at all. The rest of us have been dealing with this for a long, long time. The science and stuff is catching up. Smoking causes all sorts of cancers. Lung cancers, 97% of lung cancers are caused by tobacco. So there's a direct link to tobacco use and lung cancer. That was the very first thing that the Surgeon General reported in 1964, was the link between smoking and lung cancer. That's when all the hoopla started. The most recent Surgeon General's report linked it to 13 different types of cancer. And it's pretty much anything that the smoke or the chemicals from the tobacco come in contact with. Oral cancer, throat cancer, cancer of the pharynx, esophageal cancer. So even the runoff from spit tobacco and from chewing on cigars runs down the esophagus. Stomach cancer. Anything that metabolizes it. So when you metabolize the chemicals, it goes through your kidneys and down into your bladder, and the incidence of bladder cancer and kidney cancer is higher in smokers. And even cervical and uterine cancer have now been linked to tobacco smoking. There are some recent studies that we may be adding breast cancer to this list as well, but that association has not been completely shown yet. But there are 13 that for sure, and one form of leukemia directly linked to tobacco smoke as well. So why does quitting matter? It's not just about cancer prevention. The minute you start to have physiologic changes that are to your benefit. The very minute you stop. Within 20 minutes after quitting, already your blood pressure and your heart rate and even your body temperature return to normal. All of these things are stimulated by this nicotine. Nicotine, like I said before, is a vasoconstrictor. It tightens your blood vessels, which makes your blood pressure higher. It speeds up your heart rate because it's a stimulant, basically. Increases your temperature as a result of that. And then 20 minutes after you stop, that really means 20 minutes after every cigarette, doesn't it? Because you stop till the next one an hour later, and the next one an hour later. And it's the long-term consistency of doing that that puts a lot of pressure on your blood vessels in your heart. 8 hours after you quit, your nicotine levels in your bloodstream have already fallen by 94%. 8 hours after quitting. Well, that's a good night's sleep, isn't it? You should get up the next morning and pretty much be almost nicotine-free. Right? But what do really addicted people do the minute they roll over? They light up a cigarette. The single biggest harbinger or indicator of nicotine addiction is how quickly you light up your first cigarette in the morning. 12 hours after you quit, your carbon monoxide levels will be completely gone from your bloodstream. Carbon monoxide is a chemical that blocks oxygen from being able to attach to red blood cells. So you lose the ability to carry oxygen when you have carbon monoxide in your blood. You dose yourself with carbon monoxide every time you stick a cigarette in your mouth. And so you're reducing your oxygen load. So again, that plays into this issue of heart attacks. If you don't have the same amount of oxygen in your blood, it puts even more pressure on your heart. 2 days, 48 hours after quitting, your sense of taste and smell start to return to normal. That smokers don't even realize that they've kind of blunted their sense of taste and smell for all those years. That's a problem for people who worry about weight gain when they quit, by the way, because suddenly everything tastes better again. And so they actually increase their calorie intake because they're increasing how much they eat because they haven't enjoyed it as much for the whole time they've been smoking. 72 hours after quitting, your body's completely nicotine-free. So think about what that means for the cessation folks. The worst time for somebody who's trying to quit is the very first 72 hours. If you make it 3 days, your chances of making it through the whole thing go up astronomically. The very first 72 hours. And in fact, it's interesting, people's complaints about nicotine withdrawal actually go up over that first 72 hours and then come down after that. 7 to 14 days after you quit, all of your cravings for nicotine are gone. 10 to 14 days are what most of us who've done tobacco cessation think. So if somebody's quit for 2 weeks, they are nicotine-free. And that's about when all the withdrawal symptoms have completely gone away. So they're decreasing over that period of time from about 3 to 14 days, but they're still there until about the 14-day mark. 2 to 4 weeks after you quit, anger, anxiety, insomnia, impatience, all things I had without being a tobacco user, by the way, all of those things go back to normal. Now, why would these things kind of linger after the nicotine has gone? Because this is all about habits. This is all about your lifestyle. It takes 20 to 30 repetitions of a behavior before you learn that behavior. That's just when you're... If I'm trying to learn how to take medication, if my doctor says to me, you have strep throat, you're going to take this antibiotic for 10 days, I will never get it right. I'll never remember it. But when they put me on cholesterol medicine and I have to take it once at night, you know, initially I'm not so good at it, but then before long I've got it and I'm doing it every time. It becomes part of my routine. It takes 20 or 30 repetitions before something becomes routine. So when you're not smoking, you have to do that. If you always smoke with a cup of coffee in the morning, you have to do that 20 or 30 times before that kind of solidifies as a new behavior. And that's why people have all these types of symptoms, and that's why it takes about 4 weeks for that to all go away. 2 weeks to 3 months after quitting, your risk of a heart attack is already dropping. And mostly that's because your nicotine load has already gone down. 1 to 9 months after quitting, inflammation of your nose, throat, sinuses, and lungs have disappeared. This is an interesting one because when somebody goes through a cessation program, one of the first things they'll tell you is that I'm coughing more now than I did when I smoked. In fact, they'll try to use that as an excuse to go back to smoking. And the reason is because they're mobilizing all this inflammation and all this material that they've had in their lungs and their throat for the years that they've been smoking. The most important one is tar. Tar's in your lungs, it's been there for a long time, it's thick, it's kind of gooey, it's hard to get up, and so it takes a long time for you to get all that stuff cleared out of your lungs. And so you will cough more initially when you quit. And because of that, people were like, well, I might as well smoke. I didn't cough nearly as much when I smoked, that sort of addiction logic. And so it's really important that we get people to understand this, that this is actually good. They're coughing up chemicals and material that doesn't belong there, and it takes a long time for that to correct, especially if you've been a long-time smoker. And then years after the fact, you still have benefits. A year after you quit smoking, your risk of a heart attack has finally been cut in half. 5 years after you quit smoking, your risk of bladder cancer is cut in half. Well, the implication there is there's some long-term consequences of smoking. It means you still have a little bit of a higher risk than a non-smoker even 5 years out. But there's benefits all along the way. 10 years later, your risk of lung cancer is cut in half from that of compared to a smoker. And at 15 years, your risk of coronary heart disease is that of a non-smoker. It takes 15 years for your risk to go all the way back to the same as a non-smoker. So there are benefits, there's short-term benefits, there's long-term benefits. So we're dealing with somebody who's trying to quit. The saddest story we heard, not the saddest, but the most interesting one. I had a guy who came in to try to quit. He had been a non-smoker for 7 years, and he lost his job. And the first thing he did on his way home was buy a pack of cigarettes. That's a problem. But the bigger problem was he didn't come back in to try to quit again for an additional 7 years. So all these benefits for 1 year, 5 years out that he gained by having been a non-smoker for 7 years, he lost all that because he didn't smoke for an additional 7 years. If he'd have grabbed the cigarettes, realized he made a mistake, gotten into treatment quicker, all these benefits would have held. So when we're dealing with people who, because it is a chronic relapsing drug addiction, that's what it is. People will fall off the wagon just like they do with alcohol. You know, there's nothing good or bad about that. You just have to steer them back in the right direction. Why does secondhand smoke matter? Secondhand smoke is a combination of two forms of smoke. There's the smoke that comes off the end of a cigarette or a cigar or a pipe, and that's called side stream smoke. So that's the guy who's sitting out back, you know, leaning on the library building, and he's got a cigarette in his hand, and he's just sitting there, and it's just emanating off the cigarette. And then he takes a drag, and puts it back out. So when somebody smokes a cigarette in particular, they take, you know, 8 to 10 drags off a cigarette over a 5 to 10 minute period of time. They don't put it in and suck the whole thing down, right? It's intermittent. The stuff that they're inhaling and exhaling is called mainstream smoke, right? They're taking a drag and exhaling that big cloud of smoke. Which of these two kinds of smoke do you think is more dangerous?
stream?
Side stream is. Why? Why is that your guess?
Because part of the nicotine goes into the inhaler with the mainstream, whereas
Yeah.
the side stream, nothing.
Nothing's filtering side stream smoke. The smoker's filtering mainstream smoke. And it's really important you understand that the filter that they've put on the end of the cigarette is a marketing tactic to claim that it's less harmful, is an advertising tactic. It doesn't filter anything out. The biggest filter is the lungs. So smokers inhaling and exhaling those 10 drags. What about your cigar smokers? They all walk around and go, well, I don't even inhale. That's worse for the rest of us, dude. When you're walking around with that thing, you know, and you're not even taking a drag on it, you're not doing us any favors. Really. Because the smoke, first of all, there's more smoke produced, and it's not being filtered, and it's never being filtered in your average cigar smoker. Secondhand smoke is made up of a tremendous number of chemicals. I put 4,000 up here. That's the lowest number you'll see in the literature. It ranges from 4,000 to 7,000 different chemicals, depending on the study that you read. And by the way, that's any kind of smoke. Doesn't matter if I light a log on fire. You're not going to stick your head in the fireplace, right? You just inhale all those great chemicals, right? No, you're too smart for that. You're not going to go get to the campfire and go, yeah, man, let me have some of this. If the wind changes direction and you get the smoke blowing in your face, you walk around to the other side. That's because the dose is higher. But anything we burn, we make 4,000 to 7,000 dangerous chemicals. Of those, about 60 are known or suspected of causing cancer. So, and some of the ones that are known or suspected of causing cancer are on here. There's butane, which is cigarette lighter fluid, acetone, which is nail polish remover. This is the stuff people are inhaling. Arsenic, which is a poison. Formaldehyde, which is embalming fluid. Benzene, which is in your gas tank. Ammonia, which is an industrial strength cleaner. Cyanide, another poison. Pyrene, which is candle wax. Lead, which is a heavy metal. Even insecticides like DDT. Now, DDT's been banned for a very long time. But what's used now are variations of DDT. And when you heat chemicals and cause chemical reactions, that's what makes this whole range of different chemicals. You're remaking chemicals. So 60 of these are known or suspected to cause cancer. So as a group, secondhand smoke has been classified as a group A carcinogen. As the whole cloud of smoke, because of those statistics that I just shared with you. And the Surgeon General in 2006 said there's no risk-free level of exposure to secondhand smoke as a result of that. And again, when 10% of the people dying from smoke exposure are people who never directly smoked, you know that it's a Class A carcinogen. That's a pretty mighty statistic to think about. So again, secondhand smoke and the harmful chemicals in it cause a wide variety of problems, sudden infant death syndrome, respiratory infections, asthma attacks, ear infections, heart disease, stroke, lung cancer. We're going to talk about all these. I'm a pediatrician, so I go back to the beginning. Even infants inside mom are affected by women who smoke. Now, in this circumstance, it's not necessarily secondhand smoke, right? It's things in the bloodstream that are crossing the placenta. And two chemicals in particular cross the placenta. One is nicotine. Nicotine is a vasoconstrictor. It changes blood pressure. It changes heart rates. And the second one is carbon monoxide, which steals oxygen. And those two things decrease the amount of blood flow and oxygen that the baby gets, and so they grow poorly. So these babies will be smaller for gestational age, is the term we use in medicine. And as a result of that, stress, we will see miscarriages. Miscarriages are higher in women who use tobacco. We'll see babies who are born prematurely. They're stressed and they're trying to get out. And we even see babies who make it all the way full term and still are born dead. We call that stillbirth in medicine. So that's composed of a miscarriage. So babies will die as a result of prenatal tobacco use by the mom. And then once they're born, they're exposed to the same amount of chemicals the rest of them are exposed to, right? So any babies who come out they've already been stressed in utero, so they're probably small for gestational age. Sudden infant death syndrome is 3 times more common in homes where somebody smokes than in homes where nobody smokes. Nobody knows why that is. It's just an association. Most of us believe it's got something to do with carbon monoxide, which may be hard to detect in the infants. But we don't know why or what the chemical is. We don't know that from just sudden infant death syndrome in general. It's not a well understood process. Again, small birth weights because of poor growth inside mom. They can have brain abnormalities, so some can have mental retardation, but more commonly, learning disabilities, including attention deficit disorder later in life. Some of that may be due to prenatal and neonatal type exposure, and some may be long-term exposure to nicotine in the home. And then respiratory infections, and that's the big one that I saw as a pediatrician. Children and teens. The Surgeon General and the EPA both urge that smoking in the presence of children and teens be avoided. And the main reason is that when you compare a child at any age in a house where they're smoking to a child of the same age in a non-smoking house, there's an increase in the number and severity of respiratory infections in particular, but anything that smoke touches, almost like we talked about with the cancer. So they'll have nasal infections and sinusitis at higher rates, they'll have ear infections, they'll have throat infections, including strep, including an increase in strep positive cultures, bronchitis, pneumonia, all of those things go up. Even more importantly, teens who are exposed to smoking in the home are more likely to become smokers themselves. That's a role modeling thing. If you see it and you think it's a normal behavior, you're more likely to do it. If you think it's a normal part of adulthood, you're more likely to do it. And then asthma is a particular problem. Asthma, obviously, is a condition where something sets off the tiny airways in your lung to clamp down and make it very, very hard to breathe. And that can be anything. It can be a viral infection, it can be a change in air temperature, but chemicals play a big part in that. And so if you're in a home where there's 4,000 additional chemicals, over the long haul, your chances of having an asthma attack go up. And that's what happens. We see kids who have asthma have more frequent asthma attacks. They'll be more severe. They'll spend more time in the doctor's office in the emergency room, and even more time in hospital admissions, including intensive care unit admissions. Now, kids who have asthma have problems, but the kids who have asthma and live in a home where they're smoking have significantly more problems. Secondhand smoke cannot be controlled by ventilation or cleaning. Because you'll get the argument, always hear the argument, well, just put some ventilation units in and let my barn be smoking bar, whatever. And even the group that's tasked with this, the American Society of Heating, Refrigerating, and Air Conditioning Engineers, issued a position paper that said that's not true. In fact, they said, and I'm going to quote it directly, at present, the only means of effectively eliminating the health risks associated with indoor exposure is to ban smoking activity. And that was their position paper in 2006, and that has not changed. There are no ventilation systems that are capable of filtering out the 7,000 chemicals, the 4,000 to 7,000 chemicals from secondhand smoke. And that's indoor environments, let's be clear. This is outdoor environments. This is a fascinating study that was just published in 2012 by a group at UC San Francisco. What they looked at was the association between smoke-free legislation and then hospitalizations in those communities for heart disease, strokes, and respiratory diseases. So they actually did what they call a meta-analysis. They looked at 45 different studies from different places in the United States that covered 33 laws. Most were in American cities and states, but they even looked at a couple of studies from New Zealand and Germany. And the purpose of doing this kind of thing is when you have 45 studies, you're pulling the numbers together, so you get larger numbers, you get more significant results when you can use larger numbers in your study. What they found was that smoking bans quickly and dramatically cut the number of people hospitalized for heart attacks, strokes, and respiratory infections, including asthma and emphysema. And by the way, that was among smokers and non-smokers alike. So the point of this is, if I ban smoking in a public place, I reduce the number of heart attacks in the general population. I reduce the number of strokes in the general population. I reduce the number of respiratory infections in the general population. And these are the type of studies that lend us the evidence to say we should allow smoking in indoor or outdoor environments because it does lead to illnesses in the non-smoking population that are exposed to it. There was another study from 2008 done by the American Heart Association, and they only looked at heart attacks, and they showed the exact same thing. What they found in looking at this was that in places where they banned smoking, there was a 15% reduction in heart attacks, again, among smokers and non-smokers alike. 16% reduction in strokes, and an almost 25% reduction in respiratory infections in the community. So why do we allow this? Because I'll go back to the alcohol argument, right? You know, I'm not happy when I go to my Little League game and somebody's smoking in the bleachers because I'm being exposed to that smoke. If the guy was sitting there with a glass of scotch, he'd be kicked out. and yet the guy's not going to pour the scotch down my throat and cause me any problems. Right? We kind of have it backwards. What's the message? Why do we kick the guy out with scotch in the stands and not the guy with a cigarette? What is our overwhelming concern about the... Well, he might get belligerent. Well, he hasn't got belligerent yet. Right? He hasn't done anything. Well, he might drive home drunk. Well, he hasn't done that yet. We're not even allowing him there because he might cause problems in the future. Now, this guy over here with a stogie is causing problems, and we're not asking him to leave the same environment. And yet, if my dad is there and he's on the verge of being close to a heart attack and is exposed to that nicotine, that might tip him over the edge to have his fatal heart attack in the bleachers, not the guy with the scotch. This is about social norming. Somehow we've let tobacco become sort of this socially acceptable normal behavior, and we've got it backwards. How much does a non-smoker smoke? So years ago they did some studies, and they did environmental kind of scans, and they were trying to figure out what's the equivalent number of cigarettes that somebody might smoke in various environments. So for the first experiment I'm going to share, they simulated riding in a car with a smoker for 1 hour. And for purposes of the study, the windows were rolled up and the air conditioning was on recycle. Of course, in the course of an hour, a smoker is probably going to have just 1 cigarette on average, because a pack-a-day smoker smokes roughly a cigarette an hour. Everybody, the non-smokers in the car who were in the recycled air breathed the equivalent of 3 cigarettes in that 1 hour. And it's because it's a small environment, cars are tightly sealed, and the recycling on a car is very good. How many cigarettes did the smoker smoke?
4.
4, right? He smoked the 1 he had, and then he also rebreathed that dirty air for an hour. So the smoker had 4, but the non-smokers had 3. Car is probably the most dangerous environment. If we compare this to somebody who lives in a house with a pack-a-day smoker for 24 straight hours. So for this one, we're putting somebody in a house, we're putting a smoker in a house who's going to smoke a pack of cigarettes. So over that period of time, he's going to smoke 20 cigarettes. And then we're going to sample the air and decide, well, what was the equivalent that everybody else in the house breathed? That means everybody's in the house for 24 hours, right? Is that reality? No. But in that span of time, the non-smokers were only exposed to the amount of smoke of 3 cigarettes. It was exactly the same as the car for 1 hour. And the reason for that is the house is bigger, it's not quite as tightly sealed, but more importantly, it has material like curtains and bedding and carpets that absorb some of the smoke. And that is actually called third-hand smoke, if you've ever heard that term. These are the heavier compounds that settle on things. And
That's
so,
why you smell in those houses?
it's exactly why you would smell it when you walk into those houses. It's not because something's floating around in the air, right? It's because it's bedded into even wall paint. My dad bought a house from a really bad smoker about 15 years ago, and the guy had died, and they bought the house. And so they're going in and they're taking stuff out of the house, and they're removing pictures off the wall. And the wall paint was different from the smoke, particularly over the bed where the guy smoked in his head. So there was this big brown stain, and the picture frame blocked the wall, and there was this kind of cream-colored paint underneath, but the rest of it looked like this yellow-orange around the bed where he tended to smoke the most. So it'll stick anywhere, but that's why it smells. Now what's bad about that is you don't breathe in third-hand smoke, right? How would you get exposed to third-hand smoke? Well, let's think about your pets, because they're the best example. So you have your cat in the house, who is soft like bedding, and third-hand smoke lands on your cat. What do cats do?
Right.
They clean themselves like this. There's an increase in oral cancer in cats who live in the homes of smokers. What about dogs? What do dogs do?
Same thing.
Not really. They smell everything. There's an increase in nasal cancer in dogs in homes where people smoke. And it's because of the long-term exposure. Now, what's interesting about this is, most people are in the house for 8 hours a day, right? They're working, they're doing stuff, they're home for 8 hours. So I get kids all the time who go, if my dad smokes, am I going to get cancer? The answer is no. You're not going to get cancer. Because you're not there, and they're not there. They're not really smoking 20 cigarettes in a house every day. You're not really there 24 hours a day. You're probably only exposed to about 1 cigarette a day in a house when you're a kid. And then you're going to go to college and not be exposed to it so much anymore. But spouses who spend a lot of intimate time with each other, absolutely. That's where you see the increased risk of lung cancer. Then the other issue is heart attacks are the more common thing. I showed you that initially, about 46,000 heart attacks compared to about a couple thousand cases of cancer. And it's the heart attack risk. Well, you know, 17-year-olds don't have heart attack risk. They're not going to have an MI at home because dad was smoking in the environment. I'm going to compare that to one final thing, and that is a smoke-filled bar, because in Florida, we still have that. We have a Clean Indoor Air Act, but bars are exempt. So I'm a former Gator Nation, right? So let's say I want to go watch a college basketball game, watch the Gators play, and I go to some local bar. I'm going to watch the game for 2 hours in a smoke-filled bar. Well, to be able to watch the game in that environment, I would have smoked the equivalent of 5 cigarettes. And the reason is because it's a smaller environment usually, but more importantly, the bars that allow smoking, all the smokers go there. So you would ask the question, and I would ask the same question, why did I go? Right? Why would I go in there if I'm a non-smoker? Just to be exposed to 5 cigarettes for 2 hours. If I watch a Gator football game, that's about 4 hours, right? So now all of a sudden, it's 10 cigarettes, a half pack of cigarettes. If I'm there 8 hours, I have a drinking problem. That's the first thing. I'm in the bar. And I say that jokingly, but that's about a pack of cigarettes, right, if I'm there 8 hours. But who is there 8 hours? Waitresses and bartenders. They're the only class of employees not protected by the Florida Clean Indoor Air Act. They get to smoke a pack of cigarettes just to go to work every day. And you can make the case, well, maybe they're smokers, in which case they smoke an extra pack of cigarettes every day, even if they're smokers. Because if they're a pack-a-day smoker and they work in that environment, they've smoked 2 packs of cigarettes. Florida Clean Indoor Act is very interesting. We were one of the first states to do this back in 1995. It was a pretty wimpy Clean Indoor Air Act, but it was one of the first on the books. But in 2002, the Florida voters passed a constitutional amendment, had a long, complicated title, Protect People from the Health Hazards of Secondhand Tobacco Smoke by Prohibiting Workplace Smoking. And that passed overwhelmingly, and it was added to the Constitution in January of 2003. And by the following summer, the law was passed. And what's the law say? Well, more than anything, it says a person may not smoke in an enclosed workplace. That's the key. And there's some definition of what is an indoor workplace, and it's where more than one person engages in work, where it's predominantly or totally bounded on all sides and above by physical barriers, and that doesn't mean that if you have windows or a screen that you're exempt. Even if there's windows or a screen, that's considered bounded. So if you go to a bar and they go, well, I opened this gigantic window up, and I should say a restaurant, not a bar specifically, that's not good enough. So it's pretty loose on the definition of indoor. There are some exceptions. Private residences for obvious reasons. Retail tobacco shops, this is primarily cigar shops in Florida, right? Might be electronic cigarette shops at this point. Designated guest rooms at hotels, standalone bars, which we talked about. Smoking cessation programs is important for this campus because there may be a smoking cessation or a research project going on the campus that would allow smoking as part of the research. That's an exception to the Clean Indoor Air Act. Custom smoking rooms, which are usually for international travel at airports. And then membership associations, this would be like your Moose Lodge, right? Or your American Legion Hall, where it's a private club, and as long as nobody's paid, you know, if they have a volunteer bartender, they're okay. But if somebody's paid, that's an employee, and they have to abide by the rules. And they have to put signs up. If they're allowed smoking, they have to put a sign up. So here on the campus, if somebody was doing smoking cessation research and allowing smoking as part of that, they would have to put a sign up to warn other people that that was going on the campus. The Florida Clean Indoor Air Act is designed to protect workers. It does not currently extend to residents affected by secondhand smoke in multi-unit housing. So a dormitory would be an example where that wouldn't extend. Other states have been implementing all kinds of sort of catch-up policies for group settings like multi-unit housing, college campuses, etc., which is what we're going to talk about now. And a lot of facilities are choosing to voluntarily extend similar clean air policies to other environments. So a private restaurant could decide patios are not part of the Clean Indoor Air Act. That's an outside environment. But a restaurant could make their patio tobacco-free. They own the thing. So the difference there is the state's not telling them they can't, but an owner can clearly do that to their own property. You can extend that to the conversation we're having about a college campus. College campus can clearly make that determination to do that. It's a privately held trust. It's not by law. There are many financial benefits from making a facility smoke-free. So when we're going into even small businesses and trying to convince them to do that, there's decreased maintenance costs. I just described what my dad had to do to his house when he moved into it just from a one-time smoker. Decreased fire insurance costs is an interesting one. If you allow no smoking, it can actually reduce the cost of maintaining fire insurance. But more importantly, it's what happens to staff. Because when there's decreased smoking, there's decreased sick time, there's decreased lost time, and there's decreased health insurance costs. Differential health insurance costs have become a big issue in recent years. Smokers versus non-smokers, especially for groups that are self-insured. They'll put a premium on health insurance for those who smoke on the staff. What's the cost to your business? These are averages. This was put out in 2013. This is the most recent numbers I can give you. These are some of the differential costs per year for a smoking employee. So healthcare costs on average are about $2,000 more per employee. Sick days, about $517 extra on average. Distractions at work. This is just distractions at work. This is not leaving. Leaving, taking a smoking break is a separate category. What I want to point out is the cost of smoking breaks, $3,000. It's more than everything else combined. And here's what that looks like, right? I'm at work, and I'm a smoker, and I leave, take 4 10-minute smoke breaks. That's not a lot, 4 10-minute smoke breaks. That's 40 minutes of my work day. That's 8% of my work day. So if I make $40,000 a year, $3,200 of that, I just walked away from my job, compared to a non-smoker. And more businesses are realizing that smoke breaks are an enormous cost. And so there are groups, like organizations they're going to no hire policy. They won't hire any more tobacco users, and they're going to let who they have kind of grandfather in and kind of go off by attrition. There are places taking a more aggressive stance. They're testing them right before open enrollment for health insurance for nicotine byproducts, and if they're positive, they don't get to keep their job. There are some people taking a very pushy stances on this because of this cost. It's hurting their bottom line to have people there. It's a recreational drug that they're bringing to work. They wouldn't allow pot at work. Right? We can argue about the differences between the two drugs, but you wouldn't allow pot at work. You wouldn't allow alcohol at work, right? And if they were disruptive at work because of their alcohol use, you clearly see why there would be disciplinary action that may ultimately lead to their firing. Tobacco's finally joining the club, and rightfully so, because it has more health implications than the other ones. Not that the other ones are insignificant. Please don't take that as the message. As a point of reference, I'm trying to say it's time to have a level playing field for all recreational drug use in the workplace. According to the CDC, the additional lifetime medical expenses for smokers compared to non-smokers, these are in 2002 dollars, about $15,800 for male smokers and $17,500 for female smokers. That's average aggregate over a lifetime. So that's just for, this isn't taking the person who's going to go get cancer, right? This is, you're missing because of respiratory infections and you're taking more time off and you've got to go to the doctor, and so there's this increase in that. And then there is a bad case of something that gets lumped into that, so these are averages. But pretty significant differences for smokers compared to non-smokers. This is a really important study to me as a pediatrician, and part of why social norming is probably more important than a lot of the other stuff we talk about. This was a great set of studies done up in Massachusetts at the Boston School of Public Health. And what they found was that restaurant restrictions changed youth's perception about tobacco use and whether or not they were going to go on to become long-term tobacco users. So the first study was published in 2004, and what happened was in Massachusetts, where they had a statewide Clean Air Act like ours, counties and municipalities were doing it differently. So they had some places that had 100% tobacco-free restaurants, and they had other places that had no restrictions on smoking in restaurants, and then they had that group that had the old smoking, non-smoking section. Then they surveyed students using zip codes, and knowing the zip codes, they knew what the rules were in those communities. And what they found in the communities that had strict restaurant bans, children had a poor perception about tobacco use. They didn't view it as socially acceptable. In places that had no bans, that association was not as strong, and in the places in the middle, it landed somewhere in between. That was just their perception, whether they thought it was a smart thing to do. They followed those kids up, and in 2008, they published a study looking at whether they went on to become regular tobacco users, or did it change their experimentation with tobacco. What they found was it didn't change experimentation. Same number of kids in all those communities tried tobacco. But there was a greatly reduced number of kids who went on to become long-term tobacco users in the communities that have restaurant bans. So the message that it wasn't acceptable changed their desire or their decision to do that long-term. That's a huge public health victory. That you can reduce the amount of kids who start simply by not allowing it in a public place and saying it's not really acceptable. And that's why we fight for some of these public use bans or restrictions, is because of the impact it has, the messaging it sends to everybody in the community. That it's not really an acceptable thing to do, there's some harm involved, whether you do it or not, your business, but we can't really allow this to go on in public anymore. And what does that look like? Well, here's a guy, right? Guy, it looks like me on a Saturday night. I don't really wear a suit on a Saturday night, but glass of scotch and a cigar. Right? That might be what I look like on a Saturday night, might not be. You guys don't know that because I don't walk around and flaunt it, right? And if I put that guy in a bar setting, he would look totally normal. But if I put him at the playground, he looks a little creepy. Right? I put him over at the casino, maybe he's okay. Put him at the beach, not so much. So where we do these activities makes a difference. It sends a message. And so that's why it's important that we don't allow it in every environment. There is a time and a place for all adult activities. I'm not here to say you don't allow adult activities or you don't allow an adult to make these decisions. But for years and years and years, I've been allowed to pee, but not on your campus. Right? There's a time and a place for me to urinate. There's a time and a place for me to have a cocktail. It's not at my son's Little League game. Okay? So it's time we all realize that smoking has that very same impact. And that's why, more than anything, it's really important that we start to say, not everywhere. Not everywhere. Businesses can help. This campus has done a great job of promotional materials for their policy, display materials outlining the issue. You couldn't have a better setup here on the campus for referring people to information. You have an entire website dedicated to this particular thing. Florida has great resources. Florida is one of the 3 most proactive states with spending tobacco settlement dollars on prevention campaigns in the country. We're number 3 in the entire country for working on this issue. And so there's materials available at Tobacco Free Florida to explain why this is an issue. Report violations of the Florida Clean Indoor Air Act to the Department of Health. If you don't know how to do that, you call the local Department of Health, they'll get you to the number. There is a hotline at the state level to report violations of the Florida Clean Indoor Air Act if you see them. Expand voluntary smoking restrictions, just like we're doing here. Push people away from business entrances. That's a big one for me. I don't want to walk through that cloud and go eat in there. I'm already banished to the inside of the restaurant. I'm not allowed to sit on the patio. I mean, I'm allowed to sit on the patio, but when I sit there and expose myself to that, no. So I already have to eat indoors. And on top of that, I've got to walk through all the smokers who've come out to stand right in the doorway. Businesses are allowed to clear that out. Nothing says they have to be allowed to smoke, 10 feet from the door. Smoke-free campuses and smoke-free multi-unit housing properties are really important, especially smoke-free common areas on those facilities. If you're not going to make the units smoke-free, at least make the pool and the patio and the common room smoke-free so that all the families can enjoy them without having to go in and smell smoke from the previous person who used the space. Support local ordinances to work on these issues. Litter ordinances and fire safety ordinances included on that. We're in a big rush here to do, we can't do tobacco-free beaches because of the way the Clean Indoor Air Act is written, but we can certainly work on that as a litter issue. And many of the communities are looking for strategies to use litter as the way to try to get reduced tobacco use on the beaches. And join the Tobacco-Free Partnership, which exists here. Every county in Florida has one. Broward County has a very active one. The meetings are held at the Health Department the third Thursday of the month at 8 o'clock in the morning. So get your job and run. It takes me 45 minutes to get down there. But very active on all sorts of issues, including tobacco-free initiatives like the college is working on right now. Isn't smoking a right? No. There's no legal right to smoke. I'm not a constitutional attorney, but I've read it. The word smoke doesn't appear one time in the Bill of Rights. It's an adult activity. It's legal. You can choose to do it, but it's your choice to do it. It's not a right to do it. And so you can't plead that I have a right to do this in every environment. Nothing stops an owner or an employer from implementing a smoke-free policy or prohibiting smoking on their property, just like you can demand that dogs are on a leash or that you pick up behind your dog, right? It's that sort of thing. There's, smoke in the environment. We don't want it here. It's about the smoke, not the smoker. Of course they have the right to do that, but not necessarily everywhere. In fact, what we're finding more and more is that when these come to disputes, that the people who are negatively impacted have the right to seek legal action and have always won. The smokers never won in any of these court cases that has actually gone to court. Now, there's not a ton of them because most people don't push it. But in circumstances where it's been pushed, the non-smoker who's been affected by the smoke has always won the court cases. And they're really winning on a couple of different... In fact, the American Lung Association fields phone calls. The #1 complaint is from non-smoking residents about smoking neighbors. That's the #1 phone call fielded by the American Lung Association, is on that very issue. When smoking residents or owners who allow smoking in their buildings go to court, even the owners of the building can be held liable if they're not protecting the non-smokers. I bring that up only because I've never seen a court case where a college got sued because a student got exposed to secondhand smoke. But I can see a world where that could happen, based on some of the Americans with Disabilities Act rules. That if you're not providing me, I have asthma, and you're not providing me a clean environment. I can see that coming. So Broward College is on a proactive side on that, but we don't allow it. So, now if something happens, if an asthmatic's exposed to a smoker on campus, it's not the college's fault. They've done everything they can in their power to make that a clean environment for all their students. There's two things that usually win the day. One is nuisance type, same thing with loud music, right? Same kind of dispute. It's a nuisance to the non-smoker. And in this case, it's always been defined as smoke or smell, noise, gas, fluid, which interferes with the ordinary comfort of the occupant in his property. And a lot of times it's lanais, it's the patios. I go to sit on my patio, and the guy next door is out on his patio, and it's drifted over onto my patio. That's when most of the disputes. But certainly there's been, with shared walled space, there's also been smoke that bleeds through walls or through ventilation, shared ventilation in some of these condos, affecting the non-smoker. There are court precedents. These are from Florida, these court precedents. This is one that said the landlord was liable. They're not creating the nuisance, but they're continuing or failing to take action to correct the nuisance. And they held the homeowners association. Condos are the toughest ones because they're owned units as opposed to rental units. People who own rental property can do what they want with their rules. And this was another one from Florida. And again, failure to enforce a nuisance provision made the owners of the facility liable. More important than anything is, again, I'll say it one more time, it's not about the smoker, it's about the smoke. And for me, I'm trying desperately to help people who are smoking become non-smokers, to become former smokers, long-term former smokers. It's really important to help the people affected by any change. They are, for all intents and purposes, addicts. We don't consider them that, the way we treated tobacco in the United States, but that's the case, that's the reality. It's one of the most addictive substances on the planet. And so we have to treat them like that. And so make sure to provide programs or promote programs for cessation. Because your hope is that by being inconvenient, by having to walk to the curb outside the complex to smoke, that you're inspiring them to want to make a change. That inconvenience might be the thing that helps to prompt them to do a cessation program. They should be offered or encouraged to use a program that includes both medications to overcome nicotine withdrawal symptoms, that includes nicotine replacement therapy or other prescription medications, and support, and that can be telephone, computer-based, or face-to-face type counseling. And the beauty in Florida, for those planning for a quit attempt, should set a quit date that's several weeks in advance. Never wake up one day, today's the day. Get some resources established. Gather support among your family and friends, your co-workers. Have support in every environment. Lean on that support after you quit. Warn them it's coming. Warn them you're going to be a bear, and then lean on that support. One of the key things you can do is help people change their habits, because so much of this is habitual. You have to have people alter their smoking behavior about a week before they ever try to quit. And some of the things we've used in the past have been to have people smoke with their opposite hand. In fact, that people are so automatic in their response. I had a woman who was a right-hand smoker, and she comes in one time, she goes, I had a cigarette going in both hands, because she didn't even recognize that she had one in her left hand. It didn't belong there, so in her brain it wasn't there. Smoke at a different location. Some people have a smoking chair. Some people light up the minute the phone rings. Don't do any of that. Switch cigarette brands. Switch where you buy them. Switch how you buy them. Buy them a pack a day instead of a carton. Make it less convenient. And the key one is put your cigarettes in the trunk whenever you drive, so you don't have access to them on the road. Those are some of the things that we have people do well in advance of their quit attempt. And then write down, or the other one that I've used is have them, when they smoke, they're only smoking. Because what I want them to realize is how much time they waste just smoking. Write it down. Smoke 20 cigarettes a day at 10 minutes a pop, it's about 200 minutes. It's over 3 hours that you spend smoking. If you're doing nothing else, you're going to feel like you're wasting a tremendous amount of your time. So either have them write it down so they're aware of that, or better yet, make them only smoke when they smoke. That's what you're doing, that's the only thing you're doing. You're not on your phone, you're not on the computer, you're not talking to mom. Smoke, for the sake of smoking. And then stress management is really important, because many people believe that nicotine has relieved their stress. That's not true. Nicotine withdrawal is its own stress, and when you use nicotine, it goes away. But your daily stress is the same for everybody. So trying to get them to take credit for their own stress management skills is one of the hardest things you can do for a person who's trying to quit. Major stressors are random, so even if somebody's had a successful quit attempt, I used the example of the guy who lost his job after 7 years of not smoking, and the first thing he did was buy a pack of cigarettes. They're random, they hit hard, and people can fall back to default settings that they hadn't done for years with major stressors. In Broward County, of course, we have several free tobacco cessation programs. Florida's 3 Ways to Quit, completely funded by the tobacco settlement dollars, done by phone via the quit line, click on the computer to do it, and then our friends at AHAC provide the face-to-face counseling. Nova Southeastern's the hub of that here in South Florida, so it's right across the street. So you have great resources in the neighborhood for doing face-to-face counseling, and you have several classes that are going to be right here on campus. Last thing I want to touch on, switching is not quitting. So you're going to hear people who have these electronic cigarettes tell you, well, I quit smoking. Really? You quit, huh? So what's that thing in your hand? Because my definition of quitting is you're done. People who are using these cigarettes have been sold on this notion that it's better for them and have switched. So they're spending their money over here instead of over here. This is a business model designed by the marketers of electronic cigarettes to get people to use electronic cigarettes instead of traditional tobacco, because then they can pocket the money. And anymore, Big Tobacco is making electronic cigarettes. All 3 top tobacco manufacturers in the United States have released electronic cigarettes. I don't think that's because they want their clients to quit. I think it's because they don't want them to go anywhere. Right? And if this industry is succeeding, we better get involved in it, because all of our clients are going to move over to them, and we're going to lose out. So it's maintenance of nicotine addiction is what an electronic cigarette is good at. You're going to hear anecdotal claims, personal testimony that they've quit. I wouldn't have been able to quit except for the e-cigarette. I'm still smoking, see? See how I've quit? In reality, they're just switching to a different nicotine delivery system. And in fact, most studies have revealed, and these are all short-term studies, right? It's kind of a new phenomenon, that electronic cigarettes actually promote dual use of tobacco. So they're using electronic nicotine delivery systems and they're smoking. They're using the e-cigarette in an environment where they can't smoke until they get back home where they'll smoke, right? That's sort of how it's being used. So if we provide them an environment where they can use an electronic cigarette, they're not going to quit, are they? And if they tell us, because of the marketing, that it's safe to use here, it's safe to use there, we better have a policy in place that says, well, despite what you think, that's not the case. That's not how we're going to handle it. So most places have correctly married the two together and applied the same policy to electronic cigarettes that they apply to traditional tobacco. It's incredibly important in order to help people really make a good decision that we don't allow any recreational drug use in our work environment. Most of you know what it looks like. It's mostly battery. It's got an LED. Everything about it is designed to maintain smoking. Every habit and thing that's going to spark your memory about smoking is provided for you. It looks like it lights up like a cigarette. It emits chemicals over a hot coil to make a thick fog of chemicals that is warm, right? Everything about it's designed to simulate smoking. So why would you quit? It's the identical experience. That's what they provided for people. Except that it gets to be prettier, fancier, and very kid-friendly. So in pediatrics, we have a big problem because it's the #1 form of tobacco used among middle school students in Florida now, is electronic cigarettes. And that's because they look like this. And they look like this. They look like this. What the heck is this? They don't even start to look like cigarettes anymore. They look like gadgetry. And you're going to see all of these things pop up. I just read an article about a cell phone that's going to, it's a working cell phone and you can vape. Just got the email about it, so I don't have it in the presentation. Just got it yesterday. And these are refillable. We can put whatever we want in those, right? Any flavor we want, any chemicals we want, whatever it is. So what goes in there? Well, none of the devices have undergone any testing or any quality control. There's hundreds of devices now. There's thousands of chemicals. They're being mixed in back rooms of basically head shops. I mean, that's what we're talking about. Random spot testing revealed very inconsistent nicotine delivery device to device, even within puff to puff of the same device, and levels of nicotine in the chemicals that don't match what it says on the label. So we'll get patients who say, this has no nicotine. Well, really, why do you have to still use it then? Why are you still using it if you're getting no buzz off of it? Isn't that the point? I thought you were quitting. Right? You haven't quit yet. Now you have zero nicotine and you still haven't quit? I'm confused by that. And it's because some of those things say zero nicotine and that's not what they actually had in them. Is it in the best interest of somebody who's selling that to have you quit? No. Some of the solvents in the vials have been approved to ingest, like propylene glycol. That's the main fog you see in those things. Some of the flavorings have been approved to ingest, but none of them have been approved to inhale. Think about it. Water is safe to ingest. It has not been approved to inhale. Even water. If you inhale water, you drown. So even the safest chemical, smallest molecule on the planet, is not safe for you to inhale. So let's be clear. If something's approved to eat, that doesn't mean you should inhale it. Studies have also revealed the presence of other dangerous chemicals in there. Nicotine-specific nitrosamines, which are carcinogens made from nicotine. By heating. When you heat the nicotine, it makes these chemicals. So going over the hot coil promotes the formation of these carcinogens. Formaldehyde in higher levels than traditional cigarettes. Again, because of the heating element. And heavy metals because, oh, it's a metal device. So there's 9 or 10 identified heavy metals that people were inhaling in that chemical cloud. Chromium, nickel, lead, just to name a few. Studies have revealed that bystanders are exposed to the same levels of nicotine when you compare that to traditional tobacco smoke. So if you're smoking a cigarette, and I'm in your environment, and I'm breathing the smoke, I'm going to have about 1/10 of the nicotine in my bloodstream that you have. 1/10. If you have an e-cigarette and you're doing that, I'm also going to have about 1/10 of the nicotine that you have in your bloodstream. Interesting that the number of deaths from secondhand smoke is about 1 in 10, isn't it? And that's the nicotine alone. So heart attack risk is probably not going to be reduced for the users and may not be reduced for those of us in the secondhand vape. Studies have demonstrated airway obstruction caused by short-term use of e-cigarettes, asthma-like symptoms that can lead to emphysema. And most importantly, there are no long-term studies to tell us what will happen after years of exposure. We're in the infancy of this. So let's use the tobacco model. 1964, we find out tobacco causes cancer. Regardless of what the tobacco industry knew before that, that's the first time science proved the association. We didn't start doing secondhand smoke restrictions until the 80s, 20 years later. You know why? Because once we figured out tobacco smoke was a problem, it took us 20 years to prove it was a problem for bystanders. We're 20 or 30 years out from knowing what the long-term damage is going to be to bystanders. We're 20 or 30 years out from knowing what the long-term damage is going to be to the users. So if I ran an experiment, if I'm a scientist and I run an experiment, I'm going to expose all of you to this chemical cloud for the next 20 or 30 years. I'm not going to tell you about it. I'm going to tell you it's safe, regardless of whether I do or don't know that. And then you guys develop a problem in 20 or 30 years. If I did that as a doctor, we would call that malpractice. Right? Don't let the industry do that experiment on you, because that's what they're trying to do. Because for them, it's just marketing. We're going to expose you to it for 20 years, and then if there's problems, well, too bad, we made all this money and we're going to run. We're still playing catch up with the tobacco industry, right? We're still trying to sue them for people who started 50 years ago before the warning labels were on there. And they run and they hide. Oh, you should have known better. Well, but you lied to us. Well, that's what's going on right now. They're lying to us. And we're going to have to worry about that in 40 or 50 years. Let's do the experiment the other way this time. Let's let the people who want to use them, use them. They think they're doing themselves some good, fabulous. Let's see what happens to them and their families. In 20 or 30 years from now, if it looks like it's safe, we'll invite you to the party. Let's not do it the other way this time. Right? Let's keep it out of everybody's environment until we really know the long-term complications of that. Most current data suggests we should really restrict the use of devices in public until those long-term studies are available. And for those reasons, electronic cigarettes are generally being included in tobacco-free campus and workplace policies. And counties and municipalities throughout the state are actually tying it to the Clean Indoor Air Act, putting it under the same rules. Right? City of Sunrise has that. City of Lighthouse Point has that. Cities and counties throughout the state are actually saying, if you can't smoke traditional cigarettes here, you can't use e-cigarettes either, which solves your problem in an indoor workplace because it's being mandated. It's being tied to the Clean Indoor Air Act. But locally, we're not going to get the legislature to put that in the Clean Indoor Air Act, I can assure you. And there's one other reason I'm going to play this on as you guys go out because I know time's up. Before I show this, there's one other reason, and I'll run the video on your way out, but does anybody have any questions about anything? I know you're kind of an audience that was receptive to the notion, so, and I applaud the university for taking this stand. It's one of many colleges that's done it in Florida, and kudos. You've heard it, it's part of the whole complex now. Yes, ma'am?
I just have one quick question. Does this concept apply to hookahs as well?
Hookah's got an interesting backstory, right? So hookah is when people smoke in a group setting, generally in what would be considered a bar. So it seems to fall under the bar exception right now. And college students between the ages of 18 and 21 are the target group, right? They can't drink till they're 21. They're only 18, so they're looking for a communal setting up near. So like in Gainesville, there's about 8 hookah bars. What's interesting about hookah is that it's got a tremendous amount of smoke produced per pouch. So if each pouch will produce the equivalent of 100 to 200 cigarettes worth of smoke. So if 4 people are sharing that, that's somewhere between 20 and 50 each. So in that hour, they're smoking the equivalent of 1 to 2.5 packs of cigarettes. But the other thing about it is it's burned with charcoal, so that makes even more carbon monoxide. So even the people in the restaurant who aren't partaking are being exposed to higher levels of carbon monoxide than they would be with traditional other tobacco products. The problem's been it's hard to, and there's been a big rise, by the way, in youth use of hookah in Florida, especially among high school students. It's the #1 form of tobacco among high school students. E-cigarettes are #1 among middle school students. Hookah is #1 among high school students because they think this is what college students are doing, so I've got to be doing this too. The Clean Indoor Air Act does not apply to hookah bars. However, probably local municipalities could take a different kind of stand on that if they chose to do that. And that's something we're trying to work with. But it's very specific to the community because it's primarily a college. Broward has some, don't get me wrong. They have, NFAU has some near their campus. Young, hip crowds, it tends to pop up. But it's not safe in any stretch of imagination, but kids get that sense and they think that because it bubbles through water that it's been filtered, and that's not true because it's gas that's the problem. It just bubbles through. It cools it off, so it's easier to inhale deep. A lot of problems associated with hookah. Is that kind of what you were asking about?
So there is nicotine in hookah?
Oh yeah, it's tobacco that's been flavored with syrup. So it's a pouch of tobacco that's been flavored with, you know, mango cherry or whatever it is, and it's a big pouch of tobacco that produces a tremendous amount of carcinogens and smoke and carbon monoxide. And the kids don't, they go, it's shisha, it's not tobacco. Shisha is the syrup. It's tobacco that's been kind of stained, not stained, but soaked in this shisha syrup. But on the package it'll go, shisha. So they go, oh, it's not tobacco. No, it's wrong, it's tobacco. Just a different delivery system. Anybody else? All right.